Number 16. Mary Leanne Fritz. In September of 2019, 30-year-old Mary Leanne Fritz of Gainesville, Florida, was accused of following a woman to the High Springs police station. She was arrested for stalking and was placed in a patrol car with her hands cuffed behind her back. While the arresting officer dealt with matters outside the vehicle, Fritz allegedly slipped out of her handcuffs, climbed into the driver's seat, and rammed the car through the gate surrounding the police station. She left Alachua County in the stolen squad car, while police tracked her location using GPS and a helicopter. Eventually, Fritz returned to Alachua County and was arrested for a second time. In addition to the stalking charge, she was charged with grand theft, criminal mischief, and violating probation. The young woman was no stranger to law enforcement. 5 years earlier, in 2014, police officers found Fritz hiding in a bush after she texted a friend, claiming that she had been robbed. She told the police that a gang of 4 thieves had beaten her up and had stolen her pants, shoes, and wallet, but she had no visible injuries, and her story kept changing. Fritz eventually admitted that she made up the story because she had wanted her friend to come and pick her up. As a result, she was charged with filing a false police report. In early 2018, Fritz was accused of kidnapping her baby in violation of a family court order granting custody to the child's father. Records show that she's currently serving a 4-year prison sentence for interfering with the custody of a child, fleeing, grand theft auto, criminal mischief with property damage, and various drug and gun-related charges. Number 15. Kendra Boon. A Florida woman was so desperate to avoid going to jail that she fled from the police and paid for it with her life in early 2024. The ordeal began when Marion County Deputy Chris Witt responded to a call about a suspicious incident at a shopping center in Silver Springs, where 33-year-old Kendra Boon was accused of trying to snatch an elderly woman's keys. Witt instructed Boon to sit in the back of his patrol car while he briefly stepped out of the vehicle. But instead, she allegedly climbed into the car through the open passenger side window, slid into the driver's seat, and began driving away. Witt ran after the car and opened the door as he yelled at Boon to stop, but she stepped on the gas and sped off. She proceeded to lead law enforcement on a high-speed chase along East Highway 40, hitting speeds well over 100 miles per hour. She also drove erratically as she attempted to throw the police off her trail. After speeding past a semi-truck on the right-hand shoulder, Boon tried to merge back into the traffic lane but lost control of the car. The vehicle crossed over the double yellow line and struck a pickup truck head-on. 2 of the truck's occupants, an elderly couple from South Carolina, were pronounced dead at the scene, while a 3rd passenger survived with critical injuries. Boon also died from her injuries, but Marion County Sheriff Billy Woods had little sympathy for the fleeing woman as he addressed the public during a press conference. In his own words, he stated, "This moron stole a police vehicle and killed 2 human beings." Woods' words were met with backlash from Boon's family, who said that they had sought help from the sheriff's office in the days leading up to the young woman's death, as she struggled with untreated mental health issues. In addition to feeling hurt that the sheriff called Kendra names, the family accused Woods of shirking policy and procedure and for delivering inaccurate information to the public about her criminal past. Boone's sister, Karistan Hinsinger, told the Ocala Gazette that Kendra would have never wanted to hurt anyone. She believes that Kendra stopped taking her medication and became irrationally paranoid in the months leading up to the fatal police chase. The night before the accident, Boone showed up at a Baptist church and told parishioners that she had nowhere to go. A kind-hearted couple took her in overnight and awoke early the next morning to find that she had left. Hinsinger tearfully offered her condolences to the victims' loved ones and said that the family wished they could have prevented what happened. She also acknowledged the difficult positions that law enforcement faced in the aftermath of the tragedy, but condemned the sheriff's behavior during the press conference as unacceptable. Number 14. Roxan Rymer. In January of 2015, a security guard detained 27-year-old Roxan Rymer for stealing from a Kohl's store in Center Township, Pennsylvania. She shoved her way past the guard and ran out into the parking lot, where her grandfather and mother were sitting in a vehicle. Rymer's grandfather refused to leave the store, so she tried driving the car away herself. However, she didn't get far before police descended on the scene. Officers handcuffed Rymer and put her in the back of a police car. After being left in the vehicle alone, she pushed her way through the plexiglass partition separating the front and back seats and got behind the wheel. With her back to the steering wheel, Rymer managed to put the car in gear and drove it away from the scene. She led law enforcement on a 10-mile chase, weaving in and out of traffic while reaching speeds of nearly 100 miles per hour. The chase ended after Rymer struggled to navigate the car around a curve and failed to convince a passerby to help her. She then drove a little further before abandoning the cruiser and fleeing on foot. Someone picked Rymer up and drove her a short distance before she exited the vehicle and continued running. About a half hour after her initial arrest, the cops caught up with her and arrested her on a slew of new charges. She had damaged the stolen cruiser and rammed several civilian vehicles, but thankfully nobody was hurt. Rymer pleaded guilty to stealing the cop car, as well as an unrelated theft charge. She was sentenced to 4 to 8 years in state prison. During her sentencing hearing, she tearfully apologized for her behavior and credited the arrest with saving her life at a time when she was hopelessly addicted to drugs. Her aunt agreed, telling reporters that Rymer had hit rock bottom and that the arrest was the best thing for her. One can only hope that she turned her life around and is doing better now. Number 13. Donald Gladen. Shortly before 4 a.m. one morning in November of 2023, a man stole a marked police SUV from the University of the District of Columbia's Van Ness campus in Washington, D.C. He used a Ford Explorer to run various errands, which included a stop at a local Lowe's home improvement store to buy paper towels and detergent. The stolen SUV was found abandoned in northwest D.C. later that night, but the thief managed to evade law enforcement for several more days. During that time, both the Metropolitan Police Department and the FBI investigated the case. Police identified the man as 50-year-old Donald Gladen after releasing surveillance footage of his stop at Lowe's. Gladen was arrested the next day on charges of theft and theft from a vehicle. His alleged motive for stealing the vehicle is unclear. However, he appeared surprisingly calm in the security video as he parked, did his shopping, loaded his purchased goods into the SUV, and drove away. Number 12. Anthony Sanchez III. Late one morning in June of 2023, deputies in Otero County, Colorado, called on the State Highway Patrol for help with a vehicle pursuit along Highway 50. The suspect, 31-year-old Anthony Alfonso Sanchez III, struck multiple vehicles throughout the chase and tried to hit some cars head-on. Troopers disabled his car using a pit maneuver and took Sanchez into custody. Just a few minutes later, he slipped into the driver's seat of a CHP vehicle while handcuffed and sped off. The suspect's arrest and subsequent escape were captured on body and dash cam footage, which showed the stolen patrol car speeding off as one of the responding officers said, "OF." After realizing what was happening, the cops wasted no time getting back in their cars and resuming the chase. Officers further down the highway set up stop sticks in anticipation of the suspect passing through. After driving over the sticks, Sanchez lost control of the car and crashed into a semi-truck that was stopped along the highway. The driver of the 18-wheeler was unharmed, but the stolen cruiser spun out and burst into flames. Sanchez was rushed to the hospital, where he later died from his injuries. A camera inside the stolen vehicle captured video of the fatal collision, which showed the car slamming into the semi just moments after running over the stop sticks. The deafening sound of the crash could be heard as the screen went blank. During his initial arrest, Sanchez claimed that his girlfriend tried to shoot him, but the details of the situation that preceded the crash and his reasons for fleeing remain unclear. Number 11. Brianna Cabano and Colleen Compton. In what was later described as a result of a love triangle gone wrong, 2 Detroit police officers and a third suspect burglarized another cop's Roseville, Michigan home in April of 2023. The victim, Otis Funchess Jr., was suspended from the force at the time of the break-in for allegedly assaulting his girlfriend and co-worker, 29-year-old Brianna Cabano. But he also had a 30-year-old live-in girlfriend named Colleen Compton. The women were accused of plotting the home invasion together after realizing that Funchess was sleeping with them both. Text messages between Cabano and Compton revealed a plan to enter Funchess's home through a window, destroy the interior, and steal several items, including a PlayStation 5, a TV, a camera, and a laptop. In one message, Compton allegedly told Cabano that she planned to pour 2-liter bottles of Coca-Cola onto Funchess's bed. To avoid having their cars recognized, the women discussed the possibility of transporting the stolen property with a truck belonging to 22-year-old Dana Sears, who was also a Detroit police officer. On the day of the burglary, Funchess arrived home to find his furniture covered in red juice and his electronics doused in bleach. The screen of his $800 TV was smashed and several of his belongings were missing, including more than $6,000 worth of camera equipment and over $1,000 worth of clothing. And in what could perhaps be described as the icing on the cake to their revenge scheme, the thieves had stolen a single shoe from more than 20 pairs of footwear. Cabano and Compton were each charged with home invasion conspiracy, malicious destruction of property worth between $1,000 and $20,000, and larceny in a building. Dana Sears, who allegedly drove the trio to Funchess's home in her truck and used her vehicle to cart away the stolen goods, was also charged in connection to the crime. She was charged with second-degree home invasion, malicious destruction of property, larceny, and accessory after the fact. Compton is maintaining her innocence, claiming that because she lived with Funchess at the time of the burglary, she couldn't have possibly broken into her own residence. All three women are free on bond, and Sears and Cabano remain suspended from the police force amid their ongoing cases. Number 10. Christopher Loeb. Born and raised in Long Island, New York, Christopher Loeb was a known drug addict with a history of stealing to support his habit. In 2012, he was accused of stealing a duffel bag from a cop car that was parked outside the home of Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke. Around a dozen cops swarmed Loeb's home during what would later be described as an uncharacteristically aggressive arrest. He was taken down to the police station, where he spent several hours chained to the floor while being beaten and threatened by none other than the police chief himself. According to Loeb, the stolen duffel bag contained embarrassing items, including pornography and adult toys. He claimed that Burke flew into a rage and that the beating worsened when he confronted the chief about the bag's contents and called him a pervert. At one point, the threats and abuse escalated to the point where a detective told the chief to stop and said, "Boss, that's enough." Loeb believed that the overly aggressive arrest and the abuse he endured at the police station were carried out in an attempt to intimidate him into silence about the items in the bag. He would eventually admit to the theft and serve 3 years in prison, but his admission of guilt did not justify the treatment he received at the hands of law enforcement. His allegations against Burke and other members of the department caught the attention of federal authorities, who launched their own investigation into the case. Burke adamantly denied any wrongdoing, pointing toward Loeb's criminal history as proof of his dishonest tendencies. But his assertions of innocence conflicted with the evidence, and in 2015, Burke was arrested by the feds. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the disgraced former police chief met with several police officers after the beating so they could get their stories straight. He allegedly instructed several colleagues and subordinates to provide false narratives to investigators, including a detective who lied under oath about what happened on the night of Loeb's arrest. Burke pleaded guilty to violating Loeb's civil rights and conspiracy to obstruct justice, and after being sentenced to 3 years in prison, he apologized to the community, the police, the judge, and to Loeb. Instead of accepting the apology, Loeb looked the former police chief straight in the eye and said that he would never feel safe in Suffolk County again. Sadly, this story does not seem to end well for anyone involved. Upon his release from prison in 2017, Loeb seemed grateful for his freedom and intent on turning over a new leaf. But he landed back in hot water with the law less than 2 years later, when he was accused of deliberately ramming his vehicle into a police car during a high-speed chase. Loeb was charged with criminal mischief, reckless endangerment, driving while impaired by drugs, and more. Once again, he accused the police of beating him during the incident, but this time people were less keen to believe the claim. While the outcome of the case is unclear, records show that Loeb isn't currently incarcerated in the state prison system. Later that year, former Suffolk County District Attorney Tom Spota and his chief investigator Christopher McPartland were convicted of participating in the cover-up of Loeb's beating back in 2012. In 2021, the 79-year-old ex-prosecutor and his 53-year-old top aide were each sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for their crimes. Burke managed to keep a low profile for several years, but he reappeared in news headlines in August 2023 when he was accused of soliciting prostitution from an undercover park ranger. According to an arrest report, Burke exposed himself to the undercover ranger and requested a specific act. He pleaded not guilty to the charge, and the case appears to be ongoing. Number 9. Keith Kalka. At around 9 a.m. one morning in January 2021, a store employee in Lubbock, Texas flagged down a police officer and said that a man inside the business was trying to shoplift. Later identified as 57-year-old Keith Kalka, the suspect dropped his shopping basket and left the store when he saw the officer looking for him. He got into the cop's patrol car and then drove off. Kalka tried avoiding law enforcement by listening to the police radio, but the police were quick to establish his location. He drove the car to Texas Tech University, where he allegedly approached a woman and ordered her into the vehicle while pretending to be a cop. According to police, Kalka then drove to a nearby 7-Eleven store and stopped briefly before continuing to drive. It wasn't long before a real officer spotted the stolen vehicle and attempted to enact a traffic stop. The thief drove to an area that was blocked off by construction equipment and was arrested without incident. From beginning to end, Kalka's joyride only lasted 8 minutes. Thankfully, the woman was unharmed, but there's no telling what might have happened to her if the suspect had managed to throw law enforcement off his trail. During questioning, Kalka allegedly confessed to taking the woman hostage in case responding officers tried to shoot him. According to a police report, he admitted to stealing the marked unit after deciding on a whim that he wanted to be famous. Kalka also revealed that when he stopped at 7-Eleven, he asked his hostage if she wanted a coffee. She said no, and that she just wanted to go to her class, prompting her captor to start driving again so she couldn't exit the vehicle. He now faces a slew of charges in both federal and state court. In Lubbock County, a grand jury indicted him on one felony count of evading arrest with a vehicle. About a month after Kalka's arrest, a federal grand jury indicted him on a kidnapping charge, which can carry a maximum sentence of life in prison if convicted. But for now, his cases are ongoing. Number 8. Daniel Barton. 34-year-old Wisconsin resident Daniel Barton was already facing criminal charges for allegedly stealing a police car in Milwaukee when he was accused of doing it again. According to law enforcement, Barton's first arrest came in 2022 after he sped off in an officer's patrol vehicle during a routine traffic stop. According to a police report, he giggled as he drove off and was later found hiding in a garbage can. Barton was charged with taking or driving a vehicle without the owner's consent and was later picked up on a warrant for failing to appear in court. He was supposed to undergo an evaluation to determine whether he was competent to stand trial, but he never showed up to the appointment. Barton's first case was still pending in May of 2023 when he allegedly stole a police car that was running on the side of the road while an officer conducted a traffic stop. By the time the officer realized what was going on, his cruiser was already speeding out of sight. The car was found abandoned at a shopping center about 15 minutes later. A witness reported seeing a man exiting the vehicle and fleeing on foot. Police tracked Barton down at a nearby Planet Fitness and took him into custody on another count of operating a vehicle without the owner's consent. During questioning, Barton reportedly said that he got the urge to drive when he decided to steal the cop car. He said that he suffers from extreme schizophrenia and paranoia, that he's homeless, and that he panhandles for a living. It seems like his cases are still in progress. Number 7. Shante Daniels. After serving in the U.S. Army, Mark LeSure joined the Memphis Police Department in Tennessee. He served on the force for more than 2 decades before retiring in 2021 and enrolling in college to fulfill a lifelong promise to his father to finish his education. LeSure kept his promise and graduated in 2023 with a criminal justice degree. But his new life chapter was tragically cut short just 2 months later. One morning in early July, officers responded to a 911 hang-up call in LeSure's neighborhood and found him lying face down and dead in his driveway. During the investigation, they found surveillance footage that appeared to show the 57-year-old arguing with a young woman. According to the police, the woman, who was later identified as 27-year-old Shante Daniels, asked a retired detective for money. LeSure entered his house to retrieve $10 and collapsed near his car as he came back outside. Instead of seeking medical attention, Daniels allegedly went into the house and stole LeSure's cell phone and wallet. She was also accused of taking the $10 bill LeSure had planned to give her and of digging through his pockets. During questioning, Daniels reportedly admitted to using LeSure's phone to send herself $1,500. She said that she spent the stolen funds on shoes and at nail and hair salons. And while she was never charged with causing LaShaw's death, her behavior certainly triggered suspicion and made her look heartless. Police arrested Daniels on suspicion of aggravated burglary, theft of property, and identity theft. She pleaded guilty to the identity theft charge and received a 2-year suspended prison sentence, along with 6 years of probation. Number 6. Dwayne Miller. Just days before Christmas in 2021, police in Knoxville, Tennessee noticed that someone was using an off-duty co-worker's radio. The officer wasn't home at the time and had left the radio at his residence. He told dispatch that nobody was supposed to be at his house, so officers were dispatched to the residence to see what was going on. Upon entering the home, they encountered a man wearing the officer's uniform and tactical gear. The suspect allegedly claimed that he was a cop and that he was getting ready for work, but the responding officers knew better. Identified as 51-year-old Dwayne Miller, the man eventually confessed to taking an Uber to the address, where he entered the officer's unlocked patrol car and used his garage door opener to gain entry into the house. According to an arrest report, the responding officers had reason to believe that Miller planned to leave the home with the uniform and gear. They also suspected that he would have probably continued pretending to be a cop after fleeing the residence. He was charged with burglary of a motor vehicle, aggravated burglary impersonating law enforcement, possession of a firearm, and theft between $2,500 and $10,000. While the outcome of the case is unclear, records show that Miller is currently serving a 2-year probation sentence. Number 5. Marcus Johnson. In January of 2024, police in Miramar, Florida responded to a call about a suspicious person banging on a local residence door at 2 a.m. A witness claimed that his brother had gone outside to take out the trash and was followed home by 40-year-old Marcus Johnson. After the resident went back inside his house, the suspect began pounding on the door. The knocking got progressively louder as the home's occupants waited for police to arrive. As the responding officers surrounded Johnson, he allegedly threatened and charged at the cops while ignoring their demands. He was tased several times, but it appeared to have no effect. Just moments later, he got into a patrol car and fled the scene. However, he didn't get far before he crashed the cruiser into the community's security gate, totaling the vehicle and destroying the gate in the process. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured in the collision. Johnson was taken to a nearby hospital for an evaluation and was then booked into the Broward County Jail on charges relating to the incident. During his initial court appearance, Johnson's attorney told the court that his client is a disabled veteran and a father of 3 who's experiencing mental health issues. The judge set his bond at $5,000 and ordered the defendant to return to court at a later date. Number 4. Boneheaded Burglars target off-duty cop. Burglarizing any home is a terrible plan, but if someone is going to do it, it's probably a good idea to do some research on their target ahead of time. In 2012, a group of 4 wannabe thieves in Odessa, Texas made the regrettable mistake of attempting to burglarize the residence of an off-duty police officer. At the time, the officer was hanging out at home with her boyfriend, a fellow off-duty cop, and 2 children. Upon realizing that someone was trying to break into the house, the 2 officers approached the suspects with their guns. 3 of the suspects wisely fled to their getaway truck, but 46-year-old Charles Mackey failed to follow suit. As the vehicle sped off, one of the off-duty cops shot a back tire. Mackey allegedly charged at the homeowner, who announced that she was a police officer and commanded him to get on the ground. She detained the suspect until the police arrived, and Mackey was arrested at the scene. Police eventually apprehended the other 3 suspects, who were identified as 28-year-old Stephen Mays, 49-year-old Johnny Allen Phillips, and 27-year-old Alyssa Holmes. While the outcome of the case is unclear, records show that none of the individuals are currently serving time in state prison. This indicates that they squared away their cases and hopefully moved on to more productive hobbies. Number 3. Arthur Lee Thompson. In May of 2011, police were called to a Walmart store in Summerville, South Carolina, where 38-year-old Arthur Lee Thompson had allegedly punched a loss prevention officer while trying to steal a laptop. Law enforcement put out an alert on the suspect's Jeep, and an officer pulled Thompson over a short while later. Dashcam footage appeared to show Thompson exiting his Jeep and being uncooperative. He disobeyed the arresting officer's commands and allegedly attacked the cop, who had to tase the suspect in order to get him into the back of a cruiser. The officer tased Thompson a second time as he attempted to steal the patrol car. Seemingly unaffected by the shock, Thompson could be seen plucking the barbs from his body and then continuing to act combative. He managed to overpower the officer and sped off in the police car, sparking a chase that reached speeds of over 100 miles per hour. Thompson blew through red lights and weaved in and out of traffic in his attempts to evade law enforcement, putting innocent motorists' lives at risk. The pursuit ended when he crashed into a landscaping truck that was attempting to make a left-hand turn and struck a fence, totaling the police car and trapping himself inside the stolen vehicle. Thompson smashed a window in his attempts to escape the heavily damaged cruiser, but he remained stuck in the car until emergency responders removed him. But thankfully, neither he nor the landscape truck driver suffered serious injuries. While receiving treatment at a nearby hospital, Thompson allegedly became extremely aggressive and was placed in restraints. He threatened to overturn his bed if employees refused to remove the bindings and began thrashing violently in an apparent attempt to make good on his words. Thompson was also accused of spitting in a police officer's face as the cops struggled to get him under control. The suspect's admitted use of crack cocaine earlier that morning was likely a factor in his behavior. According to a police report, Thompson said he was very high and asked the police if he had made the news. He tested positive for cocaine, further pointing toward his drug use playing a role in his explosive outburst. After being treated at the hospital, Thompson was booked into custody on a slew of charges, including strong-armed robbery, grand larceny, reckless driving, failure to stop for blue lights, and assault on a police officer while resisting arrest. He was also charged with throwing bodily fluids on a law enforcement officer and possession of a firearm by a person convicted of a violent crime. While in custody, he allegedly bragged to other prisoners about stealing the cop car and made derogatory remarks about the officers involved in his arrest. At the time, Thompson already had an 8-page long rap sheet consisting of charges dating back to the early 90s, when he served prison time for second-degree burglary. In 2007, he was convicted of armed robbery with a deadly weapon and was sentenced to 9 years in prison. He served just 2 years before being released on probation, but it wasn't long before he was arrested for assaulting a police officer and armed robbery. In 2010, Thompson was convicted of the charges and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. But for reasons that remain unclear to this day, he wasn't behind bars when he stole the police cruiser the following year. Number 2. Clyde Kison. On Halloween night in 2023, 911 dispatchers in Las Vegas received a call about a man walking into traffic naked and trying to get hit by cars. An officer located 29-year-old Clyde Kison and attempted to start a conversation, but the suspect was uncooperative. During the struggle that ensued, Kison allegedly punched the officer repeatedly and then stole his patrol truck. He led police on a brief chase before crashing into another vehicle and injuring its 2 occupants. One of the victims later told 8 News Now that the accident left him with a fractured neck and difficulty breathing. He was also unable to move the right side of his body. Both victims suffer from permanent injuries. Kison attempted to flee on foot but was apprehended at the scene. According to police, he continued acting erratic and aggressive as officers did their best to safely restrain him until medical responders arrived. A report described the troubled man's behavior as being consistent with someone under the influence of illegal narcotics or abusing prescription medications. While Kison received treatment at a nearby emergency room for injuries sustained during the crash, his brother called the police and advised that the suspect may have used marijuana or cocaine at a party earlier that day. He also said that Kison may be experiencing a mental health crisis. After being discharged from the hospital, Kison was booked into custody on 10 charges. He was hit with driving under the influence, grand larceny, reckless driving, duty to stop at the scene of an accident, and battery on a protected person. On a crowdfunding site attempting to raise money for his legal fees, a friend named Ryan Hong described Kison as someone with a big heart, who would hand over his last dollar to help someone else. Hong claimed that Kison was suffering from psychosis at the time of his arrest, and that he had no recollection of what had happened. He claimed that Kison felt terrible and would spend the rest of his life regretting his actions. Not surprisingly, though, the campaign raised less than $1,100 of its $50,000 goal. In early 2024, Kison pleaded guilty to 2 charges, including DUI resulting in substantial bodily harm. The other 8 charges were dropped, but he's still facing substantial prison time ranging anywhere between 2 and 20 years. According to 8 News Now, judges typically sentence defendants in similar cases to prison terms ranging from 2 to 6 years. For now, Cabulison remains behind bars at the Clark County Jail while awaiting his sentencing hearing. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Christopher Parker. In early 2022, police officers in Chattanooga, Tennessee responded to a call about someone firing gunshots into a local home. An officer attempted to approach the suspect, 41-year-old Christopher Parker, who allegedly knocked the cop to the ground and stole his patrol vehicle. A state trooper disabled the cruiser using a pit maneuver, and at that point, the suspect ditched the car and ran off into the woods. Parker was eventually located with help from a police canine. He was arrested on a laundry list of charges, including obstruction of officers, passing on the right, driving on divided highways, following too closely, failure to use turn signals, and bringing stolen property into another state. He was also charged with fleeing a police officer, methamphetamine possession, reckless driving, failure to maintain lane, and his 4th offense for driving with a suspended or revoked license. In early 2024, 2 years after Parker's arrest, an unidentified suspect stole a Chattanooga police officer's patrol vehicle. The car was found abandoned a few miles away. Thankfully, it was undamaged and nothing inside it was stolen, but the suspect remains at large. After having 2 similar incidents occur over 2 years, local residents expressed frustration toward the police for leaving their cruisers unlocked and unattended with the keys inside. Reporters from local news station WTVC requested a copy of the Chattanooga Police Department's policy for leaving patrol cars unattended, but received a response stating NA. Concerned civilians are now calling for increased accountability among law enforcement. These incidents are especially troubling considering that patrol cars often contain a backup gun that a criminal could easily get their hands on in the event of a car being left unlocked. Number 10. Janelle Garrick. While working as a sheriff's deputy in Jefferson County, Wisconsin in 2018, Janelle Garrick was busted for burglarizing the homes of grieving families while they were at their loved ones' funerals. According to authorities, she scoured local obituaries, researched each descendant's relatives, and found out where they lived. She then robbed their homes while they were saying their final goodbyes to their deceased relative. Garrick's crimes were creative and carefully planned, but they weren't foolproof. At least one of the home break-ins was captured on surveillance footage, and the crooked deputy eventually landed at the center of an investigation. She lost her job and was arrested and released on bond, but it apparently wasn't enough to deter her from continuing to burglarize people's homes. While her initial case was still pending, Garrick was caught stealing narcotic painkillers from a home outside Milwaukee. Detectives ultimately connected her to at least 6 robberies through fingerprints left behind on evidence at the scenes. The prosecutor asked the judge for a 1-year prison sentence, but in a rare move, he imposed a harsher 2-year sentence followed by 3 years of probation. Garrick blamed her actions on her opioid addiction and agreed that she deserved punishment, but said that she felt she needed more help than was being offered. Number 9. Craig Payee. A few days after Christmas in 1986, 20-year-old college student Cara Knott left her boyfriend's house in Escondido, California, and headed to her parents' home in El Cajon. She never arrived at her destination. Her car was found on a dead-end street near Interstate 15 in San Diego County the next day, and her lifeless body was discovered at the bottom of a 65-foot, 19.8 meters ravine nearby. She had been beaten, strangled, and thrown off an abandoned bridge. 2 days after Cara's murder, a reporter interviewed 13-year California Highway Patrol veteran Craig Payee about how to avoid falling victim to predators on the road. He had suspicious scratches on his face, which he claimed were from falling against a sharp fence. But when the segment aired, at least 24 women reported that Payee had made inappropriate advances toward them in the past. Several callers claimed that Payee had pulled them over on the same exit ramp where Cara was killed. The women said that Payee wasn't violent toward them, but that he made unwelcome advances that made them feel uncomfortable. One witness told police that on the night of the murder, they saw Payee roll into a gas station near the crime scene at a high rate of speed and in an obviously disheveled state. Others reported seeing Kara's car getting pulled over by a CHP vehicle on the night of her death. Inside Payee's patrol car, investigators found forensic evidence connecting him to the murder scene. He was also linked to the crime through fibers found underneath Kara's fingernails. And while DNA technology was in its infancy, blood from the scene matched Payee's blood type, which also happens to be the rarest blood type. Even his colleagues were willing to testify in court regarding his strange behavior on the night of Kara's murder, and a closer look into his past revealed that he had a suspicious tendency to pull over women who were driving alone at night. Payee was charged with murder. His first trial ended in a hung jury, but the second trial ended with a conviction and a sentence of 25 years to life. He continues to maintain his innocence, but has refused to provide DNA in his efforts to clear his name, and has been denied parole 3 times. He'll be 77 years old when his next parole hearing rolls around in 2027. Number 8. Manuel Manny Pardo Jr. Manuel Manny Pardo Jr.'s law enforcement career began with the Florida Highway Patrol during the 1970s. By all outward appearances, he was a stand-up cop. He graduated from the police academy at the top of his class and saved a toddler's life during his first years on the job. But all was not as it seemed, and in 1979, Pardo was fired for falsifying traffic tickets. He soon found work as a police officer for the small city of Sweetwater in Miami-Dade County, where he stayed until 1985. Pardo lost his job after lying on the stand about being an international undercover agent in a criminal case. Shortly after being fired, the unemployed former cop got involved in drug smuggling. In early 1986, he fatally shot 2 men named Mario Amador and Roberto Alonso during a botched robbery. Less than a month later, one of his associates lured a man named Michael Millett to his wife's car. Pardo had previously bought gun silencers from Millett, but suspected that he was a police informant. When Millett got into the car, Pardo shot him in the head. The disgraced ex-police officer only continued to kill from there. In February 1986, just weeks after shooting Millett, he murdered Luis Robledo and Ulpiano Lido during a home invasion gone wrong. 2 months later, he killed 4 people in 2 separate incidents, one over a stolen property disagreement, and another stemming from a victim's failure to show up at multiple planned drug deals. During Pardo's final double murder, he accidentally shot himself in the foot. Authorities apprehended him at a hospital in New York the following month. A search of his apartment turned up a disturbing trove of Nazi memorabilia. Pardo admitted to at least 6 out of the 9 murders he was accused of committing, but tried to make his actions seem noble by claiming that he killed with the goal of combating Florida's drug culture. During his trial, he said that he took pictures of his victims after the murders to capture their souls and then burned the pictures in a special ashtray. He claimed he was sane despite his attorney's attempt to plead insanity on his behalf. According to prosecutors, Pardo was nothing more than a cold-blooded killer and a drug dealer who killed as a way to eliminate his competition on the streets. He was convicted of 9 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. Pardo was executed in 2012 by lethal injection at the age of 56. Number 7. Was Che Brassack. While driving on the streets of Manhattan with his wife in 2013, Alexi and Leanne accidentally ran over a man on a motorcycle with his SUV. Around a dozen bikers immediately gave chase, making him too scared to stop at the scene. The gang surrounded Leanne on a highway exit and smashed up his vehicle, then pulled him out of the SUV and brutally beat him down. It would later come to light that one of the bikers was 34-year-old Che Brassack, an undercover NYPD detective. While Brassack didn't participate in the assault against Leanne, he did help chase the motorist down, and he smashed the SUV's rear window before fleeing the scene. And he failed to dial 911 or summon any sort of help from law enforcement. Brassack and the other bikers claimed that they were just trying to stop Leanne from fleeing the scene of an accident. The disgraced detective insisted that he never meant to hurt anyone and that he fled as soon as he saw the other bikers attacking the victim. In other words, it was apparently his way of showing that he disapproved, or at least wasn't involved in the attack. Footage of the encounter and other evidence showed that the gang went far beyond reasonable means of stopping someone from fleeing an accident scene, and several of the individuals involved were criminally charged in connection with the incident. The judge overseeing Brassack's case described the violence as an act of revenge, pure and simple. He found Brassack guilty of assault, riot, and several other charges at the end of a 3-week bench trial, which means that there was no jury and that the decision to convict was entirely up to the judge. Needless to say, Brassack was also stripped of his badge. The prosecutor urged the judge to sentence Brassack to 3.5 years in prison, although he could have faced a sentence of up to 7 years. Meanwhile, the defense implored the judge to let the defendant off with no prison time. He received a 2-year sentence and was admonished in court for his apparent lack of remorse and his blatant lack of professionalism. Number 6. Sidney Dorsey. Sidney Dorsey became DeKalb County, Georgia's first African-American sheriff in 1996 at the age of 56. 4 years later, in 2000, he lost his re-election bid to 46-year-old veteran officer Derwin Brown, who vowed to investigate allegations of corruption against Dorsey. Just weeks later, and 3 days before he was slated to begin his term as sheriff, Brown was shot dead outside his home. Suspicion immediately fell on Dorsey, who had allegedly told several acquaintances that Brown would never take office and that there would be a special election for sheriff soon. Investigators traced the shooting to Patrick Cuffey, a former employee of Dorsey's private security firm who took a job at the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department's Internal Affairs Division during Dorsey's tenure. Dorsey had recruited Cuffey to kill Brown, but Cuffey didn't want to carry out the hit alone, so Dorsey encouraged him to seek help from 3 other former employees of his security firm. Melvin Walker, David Ramsey, and Paul Skyers agreed to help Cuffey commit the murder in exchange for promotions and jobs that they wanted. Cuffey and Skyers testified against Dorsey in exchange for immunity, and Walker and Ramsey were acquitted of murder. Dorsey maintained his innocence but was convicted of murder for masterminding the crime. He was sentenced to life for the murder charge and an additional 23 years for corruption charges stemming from his activities during his time as sheriff, which included using county funding and employees for personal expenses and errands. Dorsey reportedly admitted to ordering the hit in 2007, but claimed that he had second thoughts and tried to stop it from happening. Do you think Dorsey is less guilty than the men who carried out the hit, since he didn't actually pull the trigger? Or do you think he's just as guilty, or perhaps even more so, especially since the other defendants may not have committed the murder without his urging? Let us know in the comments below. Number 5. Drew Peterson. By the time Drew Peterson married his third wife, Kathleen Savio, in 1992, he had been working as a cop for the Bolingbrook, Illinois Police Department for 15 years. About a decade later, it became clear that he was heading toward his third divorce. Between 2002 and 2004, police were called to Peterson's home at least 18 times over domestic disputes. Not long after that, Kathleen was found dead in a dry bathtub with suspicious injuries. The case went before a coroner's jury, which included a personal friend of Peterson's who assured the other jurors that Peterson would never harm Kathleen. They ruled her death accidental, despite any evidence pointing to the contrary. Just 6 months later, 49-year-old Peterson married his fourth wife, 19-year-old Stacey Ann Kales. In 2007, 3 years into the marriage, Stacey's sister reported her missing. Peterson claimed that Stacey had left him for another man. Her body was never found, and she's still considered missing, but the case prompted authorities to exhume Kathleen's body and take a second look at her injuries. They reclassified her death as a homicide and charged Peterson with murder. While the autopsy results were never released to the public, prosecutors accused Peterson of attempting to stage Kathleen's death as an accident. He was convicted of the crime and received a 38-year sentence, but continues to maintain his innocence. In the meantime, the search for Stacy's remains continues. Drew Peterson is notorious for his cocky demeanor, which some might even describe as outwardly narcissistic. Number 4. Robert Carroll. During his career as an undercover police officer in Manchester, England, Robert Carroll took on an alternative identity as a drug dealer named Lee Taylor as part of an operation called Bluebeard. Its purpose was to crack down on real drug dealers, but he went to extreme lengths to make his false identity believable and got addicted to heroin. He would later claim that he got his first taste of the drug while carrying pockets of it in his mouth. Known as kitting, this got him accustomed to small amounts of heroin. Carroll also later alleged that he was exposed to the drug in other situations that his superiors were aware of. He left his undercover position in 2009 and went back to regular cop duties, but by then he was already addicted. 3 years later, in 2012, Carroll sought professional help for a problem that he realized he couldn't conquer on his own. But the addiction continued to control him, and he eventually got so hooked that he traded some of his police gear for heroin. Carroll got caught and was fired in 2013, and he was sentenced to 14 months in prison for theft and misconduct in public office. His actions may seem more desperate or like the unfortunate product of circumstance rather than deliberately criminal. And that's exactly what Carroll claimed in court when he sued the Greater Manchester Police in 2017. The disgraced ex-cop's former employer argued that he waited too long to file his claim, and they weren't wrong. He had exceeded the typical 3-year threshold for lodging a complaint in these types of cases. The police department also described Carroll's case as weak. But a panel of judges ultimately ruled that he had a right to at least have the evidence heard. In other words, they determined that Carroll could at least try to sue the department. And while it certainly wasn't a guaranteed win, it marked an unusual turning point in a situation where he normally would have been powerless. The outcome of the case is unclear. Number 3. Mikhail Popov. Starting in 1992, Russian cop Mikhail Popov murdered dozens of women in the city of Angarsk and elsewhere throughout the Irkutsk region. He targeted full-figured victims who resembled his abusive mother and gained their trust using his uniform and patrol car when he was actually off duty. Popov offered rides to his victims, but instead of driving them to their destinations, he went to remote locations and viciously attacked them with various weapons, including knives, axes, baseball bats, and screwdrivers. His victims were often mutilated beyond recognition, earning the unidentified killer the nicknames of the Werewolf and the Angarsk Maniac. Authorities began investigating Popkov's crimes early on, but he managed to evade detection for the better part of 2 decades. Detectives eventually realized that the murders were probably being committed by a cop when they began discovering tire tracks at the crime scenes that matched a specific type of off-road vehicle used by law enforcement. They zeroed in on Popov in 2012 after testing the DNA of 3,500 of the region's current and former police officers. During questioning, Popov claimed he wanted to cleanse the streets of prostitutes. He also indicated that he believed his wife was unfaithful and that he was taking his rage over the suspected infidelity out on his victims. Popov was convicted of 22 murders, although it's widely believed that he may have been responsible for more, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. Stephanie Lazarus. Sherry Rasmussen and John Rutan were only married for a few months before an unexpected tragedy brought their newlywed bliss to an abrupt end one afternoon in 1984. In what detectives initially classified as a burglary gone wrong, Sherry was found dead in the couple's home. Someone had beaten her and shot her 3 times in the chest at point-blank range. Unconvinced that his daughter was the victim of a botched robbery, Sherry's father, Nels, pushed detectives to investigate other possibilities. He claimed that his son-in-law's ex-girlfriend, a highly respected LAPD investigator named Stephanie Lazarus, had been harassing Sherry in the months leading up to her death. Investigators initially turned a blind eye to the lead, and the case went cold. As he fought an uphill battle to obtain justice for his daughter, Nels attempted to get some of the evidence DNA tested, and it conveniently turned up missing. The missing evidence was found in 2001, but Lazarus continued to fly under the radar until 2009, when a keen-eyed detective thoroughly reviewed the case file. DNA evidence tied Lazarus to the crime scene, and what started out as a normal workday for the art theft detective ended with her in custody as the prime suspect in Sherry's murder. During the trial, it was revealed that Lazarus and John Rutan had a casual relationship until John met Sherry. When Lazarus found out that her former lover planned to marry his new girlfriend, she evidently lost her mind and began wreaking havoc on the couple's lives. Prosecutors accused Lazarus of being enraged that she was nothing more than a fling to Rutan and that he saw Sherry as worthy of marrying. She was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 27 years to life. Number 1. Antoinette Frank. Murder is not unusual in New Orleans, which carries one of the highest homicide rates in the United States. But one particularly brutal slaying rocked the city in 1995 when 23-year-old rookie officer Antoinette Frank and an accomplice, drug dealer Rogers Lacaze, opened fire on staff at a Vietnamese restaurant during the early morning hours. Frank had moonlighted at the Kim An restaurant as a security guard and knew that large amounts of cash were often kept on hand. Her colleague, Ronald Austin Williams II, was shot dead in the chaos while working at the restaurant as a security guard. Two of the owner's family members, 17-year-old Quang Vu and his sister, 24-year-old Ha Vu, were also killed. Their sister, Chow Vu, and two other employees hid inside a walk-in cooler and survived. Chow later told the press that she saw Frank approaching the restaurant in uniform for the third time that night and knew something was wrong, especially since she had lost her key to the front door. Frank had stolen the key during one of her earlier visits that night and used it to get inside during office hours. Unaware that there were surviving victims who had witnessed the crime, Frank fled the scene and returned a few minutes later as a responding officer, pretending she was there to help. The witnesses implicated her in the shooting, and she was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. She's currently the only woman on death row in Louisiana. By all appearances, Frank was an average cop who graduated near the top of her class at the police academy and was even recognized for her work in the community. But a closer look into her background revealed that she was caught lying on several parts of the job application and failed 2 standard pre-hire psychiatric evaluations. Experts advised against hiring her, but at the time, the department was desperate for new recruits to replace the officers it was losing to alleged criminal activity. Sadly, she continued the trend. If you were a business owner and had to choose from the following, would you be more likely to hire someone with a single criminal conviction for stealing a police car and an otherwise clean record, or someone with a lengthy history consisting only of petty crimes? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.